We're here with Professor Dan Janzen from the University of Pennsylvania today. Dr. Janzen, I wanted to ask about your background in science. Ernst Mayr suggested that there's a special kind of person who comes early to biological sciences and becomes a naturalist. Were you always a naturalist?
Yes, I have always been a naturalist, at least as long as I can remember, which I guess would be about 6 years old, something like that. And I have to say, though, that a lot of other kids in my neighborhood collected butterflies and shells and flowers, and it was part of what we all did as children in Minneapolis, growing up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But I think the difference in my case was not only am I hardwired to think this way and behave this way, but my parents are smart enough not to discourage it. They said, well, if he wants to collect butterflies and be strange, that's all right. If he doesn't want to be a lawyer or a doctor or what have you, that's okay. And so when I wanted my first butterfly net and when I wanted first things to deal with all the collecting butterflies was the first thing, I got sort of reasonable encouragement from them. And then when I was in 9th grade, my father had accumulated a large quantity of federal leave from the federal government, and he came home and said, hey Danny, we have 2 months of leave, we have to go somewhere. And I had just been in the downtown Minneapolis Public Museum, which had a large butterfly collection from South America, and the curator had told me that these were all from South America, and I knew nothing about anything, and I said to my father, let's go to Mexico. And that was 1953. And so we got in the car and drove to Mexico and collected butterflies for 2 months, and that really opened my eyes to what today you would call biodiversity, to what we would call wild things. Because, of course, the contrast between southern Mexico, tropical Mexico in 1953, and the Minnesota that I had grown up in was enormous. And that got me permanently hooked. I mean, from then on, I went back to Mexico every time I could. I kept going. I went back there to do my thesis research. I just kept right on doing it. And I was in a world where my role models, the people around me who were doing well and happy with their lives, were also biodiversity managers in one form or another. They were mostly refuge managers, or what we would call today a biodiversity administrator. My father was the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and as such, the people in the home were other people who worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they were all related to birds or fish or mammals or something in one way or another. So I grew up in a sort of little cocoon of people who felt that this is a good way to spend your life. So my own inclination, which was towards collecting, diversity, complexity, got a lot of encouragement. And so I kept on doing it, and that's how I ended up where I am today.
Your early professional research was on insects.
That's right. I kept on going. When I got to Berkeley in graduate school, I said, I want to go to Mexico and do a thesis project down there. And they said, if you want to do a thesis project in Mexico, you go to a Mexican university. And we had this big argument. And finally, they agreed that I could go and collect insects for one summer for their California Insect Survey. 1962, excuse me. And I encountered these things called ants and acacias who live in big swollen thorns on the acacia, and came back to Berkeley and said, I want to do my thesis on the interaction between the ants and the plants that they live in. And that was catchy enough in 1963 so that they let me go back and do that. So I ended up at Berkeley but doing my thesis research in what in those days was a very long way away, because in those days you did your thesis research on campus or near campus. And so I sort of from the beginning started a professional career where I had 1 foot in a U.S. academic institution and 1 foot in a distant tropical field site. And so when I went to my first job at the University of Kansas, my early negotiations with the department chairman in 1965 were that I would be allowed to spend one whole semester of the year in Mexico doing research, and then I'll back up here being an academic for the other part of the year. And I just kept doing that all the way through my whole professional career.
Despite enormous success in your own professional specialty, at some point you turned your view more widely. When did that happen?
Well, I turned my own view more widely at about the age that normal, let's call it regular male Homo sapiens do. And that's somewhere between the age of 38 and 45 is the normal turning point. Just like you lose your vision and you need a pair of glasses, well, that's about the time when suddenly your hardwiring says, oops, the village is more important than the details of what you do in your own tent. And at that point in time, you become, if you're still alive, you become a village chief or other form of administrator. And in the academic world, you become a department chairman or a dean or head of a big research project or something like that. In my case, since I wasn't really locked into the academic community and it wouldn't have been appropriate for me to try to then be one of those things in the academic world, I became very interested in the administrative structure and the people and their things in a conserved wildland, a national park, to use the standard terms, in Costa Rica, and that was 1985. And at that time, in 1985, the Costa Rican national parks were very classical national parks. You know, a barbed wire fence around an area with a guy with a submachine gun to keep everybody out. And it wasn't working. Because society pushes and pushes relentless. It just pushes and pushes and you eventually lose. Even though you're trying to protect the gold under the bed with your gun, in the end you lose. And in 1985 we suddenly realized that there had to be another way. And that other way was big and complicated today, but in those days it was pretty simplistic, of reaching out to the society that was doing the pushing and saying, hey guys, we have something to offer you, so let's cut a deal. Let's negotiate a settlement. Instead of having a boundary and a national park that exists because we have more firepower than you do, rather let's sit down across the bargaining table and come to an agreement. And that meant taking the national park away from what you and I would call the federal national park infrastructure and transferring it to the neighbors. Well, in today's terminology, that's decentralization. In today's terminology, that's being conscious of the locals. There's a whole series of terms for that. It's being resident, and there's a whole series of words. But what they boil down to is moving the philosophical responsibility of taking care of a wildland area away from a top-down, federally imposed structure to a horizontal structure where the area survives because the society in which it's sitting sees that area as of value to them, like a highway system or a water system or electrical system or any one of the things that we all cherish and are glad to have in our society. The idea was, how can we make this, in those days, national park? Today it's called a conservation area. How do we make that national park into a thing that all the neighbors are delighted to have? And that's a sociological challenge more than a biologist challenge. And to go back to the initial idea here, when you're 45 years old and you take on a challenge like that, it's just like a village leader at the age of 45 saying, aha, now I'm the village chief. Now my job is to make the crops grow right and deal with the neighbors and beat up on the neighbors and do whatever it is that the village is best for the village. Well, we found ourselves doing the same thing for this group of people then with its national park, became the village. And we spent the last 15 years trying to make that happen, and that's what I'm talking about today.
It's very interesting that you could stir the whole group here in this auditorium about this. It really matters to you. This is a passionate thing for you.
Well, this is a passionate thing for me, but I don't think that makes me exceptional. I think almost every human being has something that they're very passionate about. It might be golfing in the Caribbean. It might be your kids in college. It could be your new house on the outskirts of town. I mean, everybody has the thing they really care about. And in my particular case, the thing I really care about just happens also to be essentially the same thing that I get paid to be a professor about. So I have the economic fuel and the time to put full time into the thing that I'm passionate about at the same time. Well, the outcome is it produces, it gets something done. I also feel very genuinely about it, but I think, again, most people feel very genuinely about their particular passion. Maybe it's collecting old cars. I don't care what it is, but it's something. And this audience responds partly to my enthusiasm, but I think partly because this is an easy audience. This is an audience of people who are in contact with biology or science to one degree or another, in their life in some form or another. So that they're already searching for solutions to situations. And so when I get up and talk about what's worked for us with respect to this thing in Costa Rica, that group of people sees things in it which can be useful to them. So they walk away with perhaps more ammunition, more ideas, more tools in their toolbox that they can apply to whatever is their daily problem with respect to biology. So when they get enthusiastic about what I say, it isn't entirely because what I just said is absolutely marvelous, so much as I've given them something that they can use themselves. And people get enthusiastic. When you give somebody that they can take home and use, they are enthusiastic about it.
Did you set out to make Costa Rica a model for other kind of activities?
No, I did not set out to make Costa Rica a model for other activities. I set out to conserve one chunk of tropical wildland. Now, my academic voice says when you do something, if you do it in a way that's generic, in the academic world we publish it, we formalize it, we describe it, and so on, and you put it out in the world, you get sort of value added out of the thing you did. So people come along and look at it and say, oh, that's an interesting idea, and they apply it. Well, I'm used to doing that in the academic world. So when we set out to design this thing called the conservation area, we visioned right away that it would not only save its particular piece of forest with its particular set of things, but that with only a small amount of tweaking, you could set that up in a format that then would serve for other people to save their pieces of forest. So you get this value added with a relatively small add-on. And that's it's sort of like when you do a research project, you get all interested in this caterpillar eating this leaf. And you write a paper about it. Okay, so you say that it was doing this and this and this. Then what do you do with it? You put it in a journal, it's read by God knows how many people all over the world, right? So you sort of suddenly, poof, put it out there for other people to use that information. And that little multiplier event that comes after you enjoyed looking at the caterpillar eating the leaf is the same process that we've done here. We wanted to save this piece of forest to make it work, but we've done that little extra bit to put it on a format like this talk today that then other people can take and build from.
One of your messages is that biodiversity is significant for humans. How is it significant?
Well, I see the significance of biodiversity for humans in sort of two big lumps. One lump is a very pragmatic significance, and that's everything from carbon storage to better water to biodiversity prospecting for drugs to ecotourism, all the things that people pay dollar bills for and think of as the normal transaction part of being a society. And that's a very important part. I mean, so wildland biodiversity, whether it's in upstate New York or Costa Rica or the Sahara, has things of that nature to offer the societies who live next door, and sometimes ones who come from far away as well. Fine, that's the pragmatics. The second significance of biodiversity for humans is that I am just a big primate, okay? And I've been this big monkey walking on the ground for, 3 million years, something like that. Before that, I was a monkey in the trees, okay? All that time, right up until almost now, I'm genetically programmed to deal with what we're calling today wildland biodiversity. Fruits, flowers, smells, odors, the beetle, the bug, the scorpion, the snake, the thing you hunted for dinner, all that package of stuff. The thing that came and ate you while you were sleeping, that's biodiversity. And you're hardwired to receive the input, the stimuli from all those different events. You've got all the receptors for it. You've got color vision, you've got good sense of smell, you've got a brain to manage all that information. If I strip away that biodiversity, put it away, get it out of your world. So your world is now what you see when you walk down a central street in a main town, when you live in a school and a neighborhood and a car and a grocery store, which are completely human constructs. So I strip away all this diversity out there. What I've done is deprive the whole set of your sensors from anything to stimulate them. So it's like taking away your color vision. You can live without color vision. You can read newspaper and you can do all kinds of things. But if you've got color vision, your life's a whole lot fuller. You can live without classical music, just the advertising ditties on the radio and all that kind of stuff. But if I add classical music to your world, I don't take away the advertising ditties, I add the classical music to it, you come out a happier person. It adds to your life here and there. Same with art, same with the fancy feathers that you're wearing. All the stuff that you add to add complexity to your life, you've got the receptors for those. And if you strip away the input, you just become like a rat in a white box. And I feel that that's what human beings are without wild biodiversity. They survive, but it's oatmeal. It's just a much duller life for that human being. And the person who says to me, oh, I've lived my whole life in downtown New York City, I don't need any of that stuff. my reaction is, give me a week, you in the forest, we'll add it to what you know from downtown New York City, and you'll be a vastly happier person. You'll be a better lawyer, you'll be a better doctor, you'll be a better teacher, you'll be a better garage mechanic, you'll be better at any of those things you do. You'll outcompete all your buddies if you understand this bigger package of information. So I see there's two separate lumps. One is the pragmatics, better water, better drugs, better whatever, that we get from wildland biodiversity. The other is that as Homo sapiens, we strip away wildland biodiversity, we have in fact shortchanged ourselves very, very dramatically.
What are the challenges for biological science right now in our near future?
Well, I would say the challenge for biological science right now, again, comes in two lumps. There's the engineering challenge, all the stuff we're doing in biotechnology and how do you work out the genetic structures of things and reassemble things, and all the sociology that goes with that. Ought we to be doing this? Should we fiddle with your genome and make your eyes a different color, or God knows what, you know? That's one big lumpy challenge, and I will let others specialize at worrying about and dealing with that. The other challenge to me in biological science is reaching out to this wild lump of biodiversity that we've just been talking about, the wildlands with all their birds and bees and insects on it, and figuring out how to incorporate that lump of stuff into society where society's comfortable with it. And this is a monster challenge for the simple reason that you have 3 million years as a human, and I don't know how many million years before as a non-human or just a monkey, repelling that wild biodiversity, destroying it, getting rid of it, moving it aside so that your domestic animals, your domestic plants, so that you yourself can survive. You know, you go to the middle of the rainforest, lie down and go to sleep at night, you don't wake up in the morning because you get eaten by somebody. Okay, so the thing is, to Homo sapiens, the wildland nature is dangerous. It's a bad thing. And we are very professional at getting rid of it. So we have to, the big challenge then is how do you cause this, us who view that as the supreme enemy, to reach out and embrace it and say, hey, we don't want you to go away. We don't want you to be destroyed. We don't want you to leave. It is a conceit in that, and saying human beings are saying we've beaten the world. We can turn the whole thing into a parking lot if we want to. But do we want to? I don't think we do want to. What I think we want to do is we have a lot of parking lots and a lot of grocery stores and all those things, but I think we're shortchanging ourselves, as I said earlier, by if we take the remaining pieces of wild biodiversity and consign them to parking lots too. So the trick is, how do we get society to accept that? How do you get society to say, oh, I'm happy to have a mountain lion living 1 kilometer from my house, and that mountain lion might eat my 6-year-old daughter when she's standing in the bus stop. That's a big, down deep, genetic, hardwired challenge. And I feel, frankly, that a lot of the solution is that we actually do take the mountain lion and his forest and we move him a little further away from the bus stop, so that you don't have your kid waiting out there at 5 o'clock in the morning for the county school bus at the same time the mountain lion waking up and saying, I think I'm hungry. Okay, that you create the old thing, good fences make good neighbors. And but in doing that, what you're doing then is saying, that big piece of wildland in Brazil or in Costa Rica or Wyoming or wherever it happens to be, we'll recognize it as a wildland, we'll set it up as a wildland, and then we'll treat it with due caution, we'll treat it with due respect. Just as in society we do. I mean, there are people in society that you keep at a certain distance, you don't get rid of them, you recognize their power and their strength, and you have a very formalized dance with what you do with them. I think we need to incorporate wildlands as being sort of legitimate members of society, but ones that have, trailer truck going down a highway, interstate highway at 70 miles an hour. Very useful thing, but you don't get in front of it, do you?
Is there hope for wild and conserved lands in North America?
Oh, I think there's hope, all right. I think there's lots of hope for wild and conserved lands in North America. I think that the human being is very selfish. And as a very selfish organism, very self-oriented organism, it gradually comes to recognize the things I've been talking about, that wild biodiversity does offer something. And then the argument becomes whether it'll be in my backyard or your backyard. And North American societies, frankly, I don't worry about them hardly at all compared to some other cultural situations. North American societies are pretty good. They've got a lot of discretionary income, and they're willing to use that discretionary income to support what might be viewed as extras above the meat and potatoes, extras above the oatmeal, and recognize that we're happy. We want to have that extra added on to our life. People who are living closer to the edge, where they're starving today and dying of cholera tomorrow, and that's a tougher call for that set of people. And there's where the bigger challenge is in those countries. But in the countries where they've got fair amounts of disposable income, I frankly am not worried. I think yes, we'll have to worry about a specific place or specific situation at a given moment in order to keep the thing rolling. But we're not dealing with a sort of blanket doom and gloom and the world has gone to hell and it's all dead. I think there is reason for lots of optimism.
I had a question from my student for you. And my student asked, how can a student pursue an interest in conservation biology? How can they get involved?
Well, the question of how can a student get involved in conservation biology and pursue, let's call it a career or livelihood in conservation biology, I again have two answers. One is, very blunt here, one is that we don't need a lot of amateur conservationists. Now, I'll be very careful to qualify that. What we need are a lot of people who are very good at doing whatever they do in society, lawyer, doctor, engineer, I don't care what it is, but whatever you do it very well, and then think, how can I slice a portion of that very well out and contribute that to conservation as a member of the team. Okay, but I'm still a very good lawyer, I'm still a very good doctor, whatever it is, I'm a good guy in Congress or whatever, I do that very well. But I keep conservation in my head as a thing I want to contribute a piece of what I do well too. You can contribute it in the form of money or in time or energy or voting the right way at the right time. So I don't think every citizen needs to become a conservation biologist, okay? And every high school student doesn't need to be a conservation biologist. You can make a huge contribution by becoming an internet nut and inventing an e-commerce business and then donating 10% of the stocks that you've just gotten through your big merger to some particular conservation project that needs cash to make it run, okay? Then there's this other set of people who say, oh, I want to really get involved in it. I want to be a conservation biologist. I don't think the recipe for that has changed one bit in my 50 years of thinking about doing this kind of stuff. You got to get very good at being something in it, some piece of biology, some kind of whatever kind is interest to you. And then what has changed, you've got to add to that willingness to learn about law, legislation, economics, all the sort of other things that biologists have a strong tendency to just forget. They say, oh, I don't care about the stock market. I don't care about zoning, regulation. I don't care about the Biodiversity Convention and the UN and all that other stuff. I like my squirrels, or I like my fish, or I like my fungi, or whatever it is that you care about. That's where the mistake is. I think you can learn everything there is to learn about the mushrooms of the eastern United States and become the #1 fungus person, but you have to slice a piece of your life out and dedicate it to reading the Wall Street Journal and to watching the CNN news and thinking about why are they having this big fuss in Pakistan and understanding society as a whole so that your biology can fit into that society. Because if you only look at the biology side of being a conservation biologist, you create an ivory tower circumstance that society rejects down the road. You come off as the naive person, and yeah, you know everything about fungi, but you don't have the foggiest idea how to integrate your knowledge of fungi, of the Great Smokies National Park, into the people who live around Great Smokies. And you can't just rush it off and say, well, somebody else will do that. I get to do fungi. But you can do fungi 80% of the time or 90% of the time, but there's got to be your little slice for society, just like we ask society to put their little slice into the conservation side.
You've not only invested in science and wildlands, you've also invested in organizations like AIBs and in the scientific community. Is that also important to you? Well,
to me, the organizations and what I think of as the bigger structure of society, AIBs, and any other group of people who get together and create a collective understanding and a collective willingness for science to move ahead, for biology to move ahead, for conservation to move ahead, whatever it is. Those to me are a social umbrella that allows us as ants on the ground to do specifics to save the Everglades. Okay, you can have all the right ideas on the ground in the Everglades to fix the Everglades. But if you don't have the bigger society-wide organizations up here at this level sort of shining a green political light down on you that says, yeah, go ahead. You know how to fix the Everglades? All right, we'll talk to the Corps of Engineers and get them to change their policies, but you got to tell me what policy to change. So they have to work together. You need the AIBs, the Smithsonian, any one of these bigger collective things operating up in here, and you down here in the mud have to understand how they operate. You don't have to go and be them, but you have to understand how they operate and recognize them as a legitimate part of the solution. And don't be contemptuous of them and their suits and their ties and their taxi cabs in Washington, D.C. You know, figure that they do that, and you do this down here with the alligators, and the two of you working together produce an actual effect.
I just wanted at the very end for you to have a moment to reflect on the message of your talk that you gave today at the AIBs meeting. What was the main message you would like for this audience to receive?
I think the main message from my talk today to this audience would be that wildland areas should not be thought of as set-asides. They should not be thought of as things that you have preserved and put over there like on the shelf or a painting on the wall or something that you think about only on the 21st of March. They should be thought of as something that can integrate really with the society you live in and your daily activities. And my analogy that I use for that is think of them as a garden in a very literal sense. And a garden you take care of, you invest in, you harvest from, you're careful about how you harvest from it, and you expect from it, but you expect to give to it as well. And it gives you strawberries and onions and potatoes and all those things from the garden. Well, if you think of a wildland area as also giving products, then it makes you, I think, my feeling of you as a human being, it makes you more willing to think of investing in it and tolerating its presence and putting up with its problems and so on, because it's going to give you something down the road. And for me, that made-up word gardenification of a wildland is, to me, epitomizes what I'm really saying, and that is view conserved wildlands, in my case, conserved tropical wildlands, as a productive, legitimate member of society. Somebody who belongs at the bargaining table and has a voice and can vote and give something to the team effort and receive something from the team effort.
I want to thank you for talking with us today. It was fabulous.
Sure, sure. Very welcome.
It was really good. You're a natural.